The clinking glasses of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant stopped when a white billionaire, Sophia Whitmore, raised her voice. "Tell you what," she said, her diamond bracelet flashing. "If you can take my order in perfect Mandarin, I'll hand you $100,000 cash. But when you fail, you admit you people don't belong in places like this." Every guest froze. The black waiter standing before her, Deshaun Bennett, 46, calm eyes, steady hands, kept his posture straight. He'd seen arrogance before, but never this loud. The bet wasn't about language. It was about dignity. "Ma'am," he answered evenly, "I'm here to serve dinner, not your ego." A few diners gasped. Sophia's smile sharpened. "So you refuse the challenge?" "I refuse disrespect," Deshaun said. "But if you're testing worth, you might learn something you don't expect." Silence. Then murmurs rippled through the room. Even the pianist paused mid-note. In that suspended moment, everyone sensed this ordinary waiter was about to rewrite the balance of power. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. After the confrontation, Deshaun stepped behind the service counter, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for a polished glass. He wasn't angry, just tired of proving that professionalism had no color. For 15 years, he'd worked in fine dining, mastering etiquette, wine pairing, and languages most customers never knew he spoke. At 46, his world was simple. Early mornings, double shift, and quiet nights in a modest Queens apartment with his daughter, Imani, a sophomore at Columbia University. Every paycheck, every tip went toward her tuition. He'd promised her she would never struggle the way he had. "Dad, people like you change the world one table at a time," she told him once. Those words kept him steady whenever someone's tone turned sharp or their eyes dismissed him. He looked at the reflection in the silver tray. Clean uniform, kind eyes, posture straight. He wasn't ashamed of serving food. He was ashamed that the world still believed service meant inferiority. As he walked back to the dining floor, the whispers followed him. Pity from some, laughter from others. But Deshaun's stride didn't break. Inside, something stronger than anger was building. A calm fire waiting for its moment to speak. Sophia's laughter sliced through the quiet dining hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, lifting her wine glass, "our server here refuses a simple test. Imagine working in a world-class restaurant and scared a little Mandarin." The guests forced uneasy smiles. Some chuckled to stay polite. Others looked away. Deshaun stood still, his posture unshaken, his breath measured. Inside, every word she spoke hid an old bruise. Years of being told he was so articulate for a black man. Years of proving himself twice to be seen once. Sophia leaned forward, voice dripping with mock concern. "Come on, sweetheart, don't freeze up now. One sentence. Say, 'Good evening, madam. May I take your order?' in Mandarin. I promise I won't bite." Her friends at the table laughed louder this time. Deshaun met her gaze. "Ma'am, I'd rather not turn culture into a circus trick." "Oh, so you can't do it," she shouted, triumph in her tone. The crowd murmured again, whispers of pity, disbelief, and tension. Somewhere near the piano, a young server clenched her towel, eyes glistening. She'd seen this scene before, just never this public. And as Sophia lifted another sip of wine, Deshaun finally spoke, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "Fine, ma'am. You want a test? Let's make it fair. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." The entire restaurant fell silent as Deshaun stepped closer to the table. "Let's make this simple," he said quietly. "If I speak to you in perfect Mandarin, you listen to me for 5 minutes, without interrupting, without judging. Deal?" Sophia smirked. "Deal. And when you fail, you admit you're not qualified to serve people like me." Deshaun nodded once. "Fair enough." He straightened his vest, took a breath, and began. Fluent, graceful Mandarin flowed from his lips. Precise tones, flawless rhythm. Every head in the dining room turned. The couple at the next table, native speakers, froze mid-bite. One of them whispered, "That's perfect." Sophia's glass slipped slightly in her hand. Her smile vanished. Deshawn continued, describing her wine pairing in poetic detail, mixing humor with elegance. When he stopped, the room exploded in applause. Even the chef stepped out of the kitchen, clapping. The woman who had mocked him sat motionless, disbelief written across her face. Deshawn looked at her and said calmly, "Now, ma'am has agreed, you listen." The moment of humiliation had flipped. The servant had just become the teacher. Deshawn didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet strength in his tone carried farther than any shout. "You asked about my background," he began. "Let me tell you. I grew up in Baltimore, raised by a single mother who cleaned offices at night, so I could stay in school. I studied hard, earned a scholarship to Howard University, majored in international relations, minored in linguistics. Later, Georgetown offered me a place in its graduate program for foreign service. I worked at the U.S. State Department for 6 years, translating between diplomats, helping build bridges where others built walls." He paused, looking straight at Sophia. "Then my wife got sick. Cancer took our savings and nearly took my spirit. I came back to restaurant work because it gave me time to raise my daughter. She's studying law now, learning to fight for human rights." The room stayed silent. Every word echoed. "I speak 9 languages, ma'am. But the one thing I refuse to speak is shame. My dignity doesn't need your approval, and my worth isn't measured in the job title you recognize." Sophia's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hide. Deshawn simply added, "Now you know who's been serving your table." Sophia's hand trembled as she set her glass down. The arrogance that once filled her voice was gone, replaced by quiet shame. For the first time that night, she couldn't look him in the eye. "Mr. Bennett," her voice cracked, I owe you an apology." Deshawn shook his head softly. "You owe yourself reflection, ma'am. That's harder but worth more than any apology." She swallowed hard, tears forming. "You could have humiliated me in front of everyone, and you didn't. You just taught me." He gave a faint smile. "Education doesn't always happen in classrooms." Sophia reached into her purse and placed a business card and a check on the table. "My company funds scholarships. Tomorrow, I'll donate $50,000 to Columbia University in your daughter's name." Gasps rippled across the restaurant. Deshawn hesitated, staring at the check. "That's generous, ma'am, but I don't want charity." "It's not charity," she insisted. "It's change. Because what you said, what you showed will stay with me." He nodded slowly. "Then let that be your real payment. To never treat anyone as less again." Sophia wiped her tears, whispering, "You have my word." For the first time all evening, her voice sounded human. That night, Deshawn left the restaurant after midnight, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. His phone buzzed nonstop, messages from coworkers, strangers, and his daughter Imani, who had already seen the video spreading online. "Dad, you're trending," she wrote. "People are calling you the man who taught the world what dignity sounds like." He smiled faintly. "I didn't teach them," he whispered to himself. "I just reminded them." The following morning, news outlets replayed the moment he spoke Mandarin, calling it the 100K lesson. But for Deshawn, it wasn't about fame. It was about peace. He ironed his uniform, made breakfast for Imani, and left for another shift like any other day, because humility doesn't take days off. Back at the restaurant, guests greeted him differently now, respect in their eyes, warmth in their voices. Every "thank you" carried the echo of that night's awakening. As he polished a glass, Deshawn thought, dignity isn't something you win. It's something you live every single day. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.